Hello and good evening to everybody. Welcome to the De Anza College Planetarium virtual star party. And tonight we have something very special for you, and more on that in just a little bit. But just so you know, I'm Toshi Komatsu. I'm the director of the planetarium, and joining me as always for our virtual star parties, we have my co-host, Mike Askins, in the field, ready with our new telescope. And I'm going to go ahead and add him to the view here so that we can see Mike. And Mike, why don't you go ahead and say welcome to everybody?
Sure. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the virtual star party here. Um, I'm very glad to be here with you, and looking forward to an hour here of gathering ancient photons.
Ancient photons indeed.
Ancient photons. So why don't you go ahead, Toshi? I'll just tell you that the conditions here are pretty good at the moment. We're a little concerned about later on in the hour what we'll have, but we'll sort of play that by ear, eh, Toshi?
Yeah, that's always one of the hazards of astronomy is that we're always sort of at the mercy of the weather and the forecast that was given to us for this evening here in the Bay Area was partly cloudy, which is always the worst forecast for anyone who's going to be stargazing, because that sort of means, well, partly cloudy means it might be clear. Will it be in the right spot? So we'll see what we can do, but hopefully the weather holds out for us, crossing fingers and toes and any other digits that I can sort of have access to here. But
Good idea.
we'll go ahead and start off as we normally do with our events here with a view of the evening sky to get sort of an overview, and wherever you're viewing from, hopefully it's clearer for you than it is for me. It's a little bit socked in exactly where I am, but hopefully, again, the weather holds up for where Mike is. But just to kind of give you an idea, we're switching over to our view of Stellarium, which again, if you don't know, is free software that you can download on your own computers. And this is a view that we would see from Cupertino here this evening. We're looking towards the west where the sun has just set. A little bit tough to see, but behind this virtual tree in Stellarium is the moon. So the moon is very, very thin and very, very young tonight. If we had a clear view and you had a clear shot to the horizon as well, the moon is only about 3% illuminated, a very, very thin crescent, less than 2 days old, as we say in astronomy parlance here. So it's just about this to set. And normally during these virtual star parties, we have Mike set up his telescope to take a look at the moon. But tonight we're going to be looking at some other deep sky objects, is the hope. And just to, again, get us oriented with the sky as we're looking towards the west here, several famous winter constellations, even though we've started spring, the most obvious of which is this constellation right over here, famous for these three stars all in a row. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can go ahead and put that in the chat if you recognize this constellation. Go ahead and select one of those stars so that I can put on my stick figure for the shape here. Again, that's a good clue that we've got these three stars all in a row. 2 stars for this figure's shoulders and 2 stars for his feet. He's holding a shield and a club or sometimes a sword in the other hand. And if you don't recognize it already, I'll go ahead and put up the artwork, the imagination picture. And this is Orion, the hunter that we're looking at, getting low in the west. He, of course, is chasing after Taurus the bull. If you take the belt stars and you go along closer to the west, gets you to a bright star over here. That's Aldebaran in the constellation of Taurus the bull here. And that Taurus, again, is this great big bull shape in the sky. These are, again, famous winter constellations that we can see. So they're getting very low in the west. You can still see them in the springtime that we've just started, but you don't want to wait too much longer to take a look at them in the sky because they'll be disappearing very soon here. So again, just a couple of winter constellations, and we'll come back to Orion in just a little bit because that'll be the first target that we look for this evening for a deep sky object is in Orion. And that's something in Orion's, below Orion's belt, in what's sometimes called Orion's sword. So again, his famous belt is over here. If I fade along this way here and start to zoom in this way here, you can see below Orion's belt is a group of stars down here. It looks like 3, that are along here, but the center of those stars is actually something that we call a nebula. And let's see if I can sort of zoom in and get us a nice view of what that nebula might be looking like here. So let me go ahead and see if I can get ourselves nice and centered there. And as we zoom in Stellarium, you can see that fuzzy bit there. That's called the Orion Nebula. That's just a little preview of what we'll be able to see with our brand new telescope, which again, we'll talk more about in just a little bit, but we've got ourselves an EVScope. If you've been to our earlier star parties, we tried using an EVScope with a colleague of ours, Alan Gould, and we're always clouded out. So we're excited tonight that hopefully we'll be able to get some views through our own EVScope that we've been able to procure here at the De Anza College Planetarium. That's looking towards the southwest, but if we pan over towards the more of the eastern part of the sky, the southeastern part of the sky, there's another famous constellation more associated with the springtime, and that constellation is right over here. This is the brightest star in this constellation. There's kind of a backwards question mark shape that we can see there. And then there's a triangle sort of behind this shape here. This one sometimes reminds people of a mouse. If you look at it this way, here's the head of the mouse, and there's his little nose, body there, and then his tail there. But this more classically is known as Leo the Lion. And that's a great springtime constellation to be looking for, Leo the Lion there. And some famous targets that are in that part of the sky when we might catch some of those is if the weather cooperates with us. And just to point out another constellation that's getting high up, sort of a springtime constellation, just starting to come up over in the eastern part of the sky. If you have a clear view towards the east, very low, almost parallel to the horizon, there is a group of stars. There's one bright star here. That one's called Arcturus. This is the constellation of Boötes, the herdsman. The artwork, imaginary artwork picture looks a little something like this, where he is a herdsman. He's the bear herder chasing after bears in the sky, one of which is a famous bear that you may be aware of. He's very close to this constellation right here, which some of you may recognize. Again, maybe you can put it in the YouTube chat that there is the Great Bear in the sky, also known as Ursa Major, the Great Bear. And let me pan back away here. Something else that's also shown up in our view, if you have a clear view over sort of towards the north right now, there's a bright thing passing through the sky. That's the International Space Station, actually making
I actually see it.
Yeah, it's a very bright viewing of the space station tonight. Happens to coincide with our little star party here.
Right
in terms of
haze.
magnitude, it's something like minus 3.8. The way astronomers,
It's
the way we rank these things is the smaller the number, so negative numbers in particular, but the smaller the number, the brighter the object is. So this is a very, very bright pass of the space station.
That is brilliant. It's really bright. And even coming through the haze there when it was a little bit lower down.
Yeah, the brightest stars sort of typically are ranked 0 on this magnitude scale that astronomers use. So this space station is at minus 3.8. It's also a logarithmic scale, so it's not like it's almost 4 times brighter. It's actually even brighter than that, but very, very bright. And in my view, at least, just about to cross the Big Dipper in the sky. So if you happen to be outside looking towards the Big Dipper, you should be able to see the space station passing through it. And cool. This is actually quite a long pass going through here. It's about 5 minutes this pass when the ISS is visible tonight. But there are lots of websites and even apps that you can get for your smartphones that will tell you when the space station or any other bright satellite is making a pass. And they're pretty cool to take a look at if you've never seen it before. Just looks like sometimes a bright dot, sometimes they're not so bright, but a nice dot that's slowly moving across the sky. Sometimes they get very bright, like the space station right now. Sometimes not quite as bright, but they're fun to see and fun to spot in the evening sky here. But how's the sky conditions for you, Mike? Still holding up?
The north is getting difficult. It looks like the south is still doable. I still do see the Big Dipper. So we've got a couple targets over there. We might want to accelerate things a little bit, Sophie, and maybe start do things a little bit out of order here, just so that we don't lose our optimum times here, because it does look like it's getting. And we know, of course, the forecast is for it to get worse over time.
Yeah, so just
So
real quick, just a couple of slides just to show everybody here that we have, again, our EVScope that we've just acquired here, and we've been doing a little bit of testing, but this is an example of a view that we took earlier when we were doing our testing here of using the EVScope here. And this is something called the Flame Nebula, which is actually in Orion. This is an exposure that took about 30 minutes to gather, so we get a nice view of the Flame Nebula. And this was done from my own backyard, and I'm in the middle of a fairly bright, I actually have a street light just outside of my property, so it's quite bright. But that's the beauty of the EVScope. If you've never seen one before, if you missed our previous star parties, is that you can get really nice images, even with some color, even if you're in the middle of an urban setting here. And the way this works is that the telescope, it takes an image of the sky. This is sort of a 5-minute exposure, and you might be able to just barely see that there's sort of the shape of something. This is from the Horsehead Nebula. There's a little bit of nebula that you can see here, cloudiness. This is an exposure that's a bit longer, 26 minutes. You can see that there's more detail that's sort of built up here, a little more color that we can see here. And again, that horse's head, a little bit more apparent there. And this is an image that was taken after 53 minutes, so almost an hour that we're looking at here. And again, a little more detail that you can see. And then just kind of putting it all together. This is again that same 53-minute image that we're just looking at. And within the software of the EVScope itself, there are controls to adjust the contrast of the object that you might be looking at. So this is not done in Photoshop or any other post-processing, but something that I was able to do just within the software on the telescope itself to bring out the detail. And you can really see that this kind of looks like a horse head, like a knight piece, a knight chess piece there on its side there, and sort of the red color of the nebula. This is something we call a dark nebula here, where the horse head is, and that's sort of superimposed over a brighter emission nebula that's generating its own light there. So there's the enhanced contrast for this particular image. So our plan, weather permitting, is to take a look at several different deep sky objects we're planning on, and we'll see how many we can get through, is to look at some nebulae. So these are clouds of gas. We had planned a star at the beginning of its life. Maybe we'll get to a star that is at the end of its life. A couple of different kinds of star clusters that are out there, some young clusters, some older clusters, and maybe even some galaxies here. And with that being said, I think probably we can turn things over to Mike. So Mike, are you ready to go with the EVScope?
So what I'm going to do here, Toshi, is I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at the control console of the telescope. And we'll go ahead and do the share here. What I've done is I've told the telescope to slew to the Great Nebula in Orion. And I did it once, and it appeared that it wasn't able to find it. And that could be because, well, I should explain a little bit. The telescope figures out on its own which direction it's pointing. I set this thing sort of up on its tripod, and I leveled it. And this particular type of telescope has got a GPS receiver, which gives it time and position on the Earth. And then it assumes that it can find, given the time, it can find where the object should be in the sky. And so what I've done is that was working previously, but unfortunately what happens is if it can't see the sky very well, it doesn't do a very as good a job as it can do otherwise to position itself right over the object. So what I'm going to do here is tell it again to go to M42. Actually, maybe what I should do is have it try and find where it's pointing at the moment. That's what it calls field detection, and you can see where it says field detection in progress over to the left part of the screen. It says field detection was successful, so that's good news. So if that's the case, what I can do is start stacking images. I don't see it. I'm going to turn off the controls here for a second. Okay, well, it may be that there's too much haze there. I'm going to start it, the enhanced view here. That's what that animation is showing you. And I'm going to step over and see what it looks like visually in that area of the sky so I can get a better idea of why it's behaving the way it is.
And while you're doing that, Mike, I'll just say that that's one of the great benefits of this telescope is that it has, again, this onboard computer so that it can try to figure out where it is in the sky. And that's something that was missing for a long time from other telescopes. Some of you may have your own telescopes, computerized telescopes that will allow you to sort of punch in sort of an object to slew to, but a lot of times there was sort of a rather complicated way to figure out where you are in the sky, and you usually have to do sort of a 2-star alignment thing, and it tells you to point to 1 star, and then then you sort of lock it in, and then you tell it to go to point to another star, and then tell it to lock it in, and then from the position of those 2 stars, then it figures out where it's looking in the sky. But with this telescope, when it's working properly, it's just looking at wherever it's looking in the sky, and then it figures out that, oh, okay, I know where I'm looking. And then it tries to figure out from there where everything is in the sky. So that was one of the great benefits, is that there's a nice, simple solution to figure out where we're looking. I see you, Mike, trying to get the nebula centered in sort of a little bit manually there, but that's okay.
That's the problem. I think that was the problem, because now at least it thinks it's, hopefully I can start the stacking process and have that work now.
Yep.
I just happened to be able to recognize the star field was slightly off, and that's all I did was nudge it a little bit to the left.
Yeah, so you can see we'll clear the field of view or make the field of view a little bit more apparent there that we can see. But we started off, as you recall viewers, that it started off as just kind of this fuzzy pixelated thing, but now the telescope is stacking the images. And what that means is that it's taking a very short exposure, and then it's taking another short exposure, and it's superimposing it, usually by sort of pinpointing where the stars are and matching the next image with a star. Because remember, because the Earth is turning, the telescope, it's slowly changing where it is in the sky. So the computer is set up so that it keeps, even though the Earth is spinning around, that the telescope keeps pointing at the same point in space. And so as it takes these very, very short exposure images, they're stacking them or putting them one on top of the other so that we get more and more detail. So here we're seeing that we have about 56 seconds or about a minute of exposure time. You can think of it that way, just as if you have like a DSLR camera and you're holding the shutter open for 68 seconds or 72 seconds, whatever it is, to gather more light. And in this case, we're gathering more data that we're superimposing. So here we can start to see some of the shape and texture to the nebula here. And this will just keep going as long as we leave it on the target. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and tap to clear the all the menu items so that we can see the nebula. Again, a lot of cloudiness around there. There's a star sort of near the top of the image that we're seeing there. There's also a nebula around there, and you can see that every now and then we're getting sort of another burst of detail coming through.
And Toshi, I'm sorry, I was paying attention to the sky there for a second. Did you mention to them about how each one of these exposures is just 4 seconds long?
I didn't mention the specific time. I just mentioned that it was a short exposures.
Yeah.
But again, every time it takes this image, it's sort of adding to the previous images to build up more and more detail here. And what we're seeing sort of, again, there's sort of the main part of the nebula, but there's a very bright glow sort of at the center, and it looks like just a very big star. There are actually 4 stars in there. They just happen to be very close together in the field of view that we have with this telescope. But that's called the trapezium with 4 stars, or sort of, if you have a nice, very nice telescopic view, then you see that there are actually 4 stars in there, and they're kind of in a trapezoid sort of shape. So that's why we call it the trapezium. But the glow of those stars, which are very, very young, as far as stars go, 100,000 years old, something like that, which sounds old to you and me as humans, but for stars, practically newborn stars here. And so they are actually what's making the nebula glow, and so that we can see it.
A diffuse nebula like this is important to think about, because it turns out that just about everything in the visible universe gets formed out of these huge gas clouds. This is something like 25 light years across, this whole nebula, the entire nebula from one side to the other, probably to extents that you can't quite see in this image at the moment. But nebula normally is classified into 2 different types. Either the type that is reflection nebula, in other words, it's shining by reflecting the light of nearby stars, or the other way that a nebula can shine is by being excited by the energy coming from the stars and causing that gas to fluoresce. And there's actually both types of nebula in the Great Orion Nebula.
Yeah, so the light that we see is from the stars at the center, from those trapezium stars. The energy from those stars, because they're very young, very hot, and very energetic, they're literally shaking up the molecules that make up the rest of the nebula there, and they're shaking the gas so much that they're emitting their own light, and that's what we mean by fluorescence. And that's how fluorescent tubes, those are sort of going out of fashion these days. Everyone's switching over to LED lamps. But the old fluorescent tubes, if you still have any fluorescent tubes, even the curly kind, that's how they work, is that there's a gas inside of the tube, and when you turn your switch on, you're sending an electric current through it, and it's making the gas inside the tube vibrate and emit its own light.
Yeah, Toshi, maybe we might want to see if we can utilize some more of this time here where it looks like we still have a little bit of sky that we can view. We picked 4 or 5 different objects here that hopefully we'll be able to get through a couple more of them at least. But we started by things that were close by, and we're going to move on to one that's a little further out, something called an open star cluster, right, Toshi?
Yeah, we can take a look at this open star cluster, and there's a couple of different kinds of clusters there. But it looks like we're at a 5-minute exposure here for the Orion Nebula. And again, that's not bad for, again, being in an urban setting. This is not from a dark sky site. Now that the enhanced vision on the scope was taken off there, you see again, you saw the trapezium as bright things, and then everything else kind of pixelated. So hopefully viewers, you can see sort of the benefit of having a telescope like this that is stacking the images. Now, traditionally, the way you did this was that you had a CCD camera that was attached to your telescope, and you took a bunch of images, and then you would, after you took your images, you took them into your computer and you ran it through a separate bit of processing software so that it would stack the images. The nice thing about the EVScope is that it's doing that all on board its own onboard computer to do all of that stacking. And so you get immediate results that you can see right away. While we're slewing to the next object, which is called M37, M stands for Messier, named after Charles Messier, who was a French astronomer who was actually looking for comets, but he kept finding these fuzzy things. Back then, the telescopes weren't very good, so you look for fuzzy things, but he was really interested in comets, so he kept finding these fuzzy things that weren't comets, and he knew they weren't comets because they stayed put. And so he started making a catalog basically of his mistakes, things that weren't comets. But today it's become a popular catalog because it's a nice selection of all sorts of different objects.
So Toshi, while we're waiting for it to find M37 here, maybe we could talk a little bit more about what that nebula, that those gas clouds do um, over time that ends up creating many of the objects in space. And that is that the force of gravity draws those gas clouds together until the density of the gas cloud gets increased, and the more dense it gets, the hotter it gets. And eventually you can end up creating a star just by having um, a large enough cloud of hydrogen gas and dust.
Yeah, and that nebula that we're just looking at, the Orion Nebula, is what we sometimes call a star forming region because that gas is slowly coming together to form brand new stars. Um, looks like you'll have to reposition a bit there. While you're doing that, Mike, it looks like there is a question that came in through the chat from Michelle. I assume I'm pronouncing that correctly, hopefully. If not, I apologize. But the question is, can we see the Northern Lights today? I did see on the news, Mike, I don't know if you caught it, but it looks like there was some extra solar activity and there was some talk about being able to see the Northern Lights. I think here in the Bay Area, where Mike and I are, we're all still a little bit too far to the south. But what happens is you get this extra activity from the sun, and that excites or that runs into our atmosphere. It follows the magnetic pole, so it's centered over the north and south magnetic poles of Earth, and it creates what's called an auroral oval. Sometimes that oval is sort of really centered on the magnetic pole, but depending on how active the sun is and what sort of burst of energy we're getting from the sun, that oval can expand, and you can see the Northern Lights from further and further south. I think in the Bay Area, we're still a little bit too far south to see the Northern Lights, but people that are maybe a little bit further to the north a little bit might be able to see it. There was a case that I heard of, this was many, many years ago, but when the sun was very, very active, there were reports of people who were able to see the Northern Lights even as far south as Mexico. So it's quite a bit to the south, but that's a pretty rare occurrence to see them that far south. So I'm not hopeful to see it tonight from the Bay Area, but if you're a little bit further north, maybe if there's any folks in Seattle or someplace just a bit north of us, then they might have some better luck seeing the Northern Lights there.
Well, Toshi, I'm afraid that the haze is getting thicker. We might want to show some of the images that we took previously, because I can't even see the brightest of the stars anymore. I think I do see Aldebaran still, just barely, but I'm having trouble getting the telescope to actually. Let's try one more time here to see if it can do another field detection.
Well, while you're doing that, maybe we'll go ahead and pause your sharing, and if you get it back, then you can start sharing again here. But we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the images that we saw a little bit earlier. And again, we were trying to plan ahead because the weather forecast for this evening was so iffy here. But let me go ahead and switch to my slides once again so that we can see. This, first of all, was an image of the Orion Nebula that we got. This was from a couple weeks ago. This was sort of on March 5th, and this was a nice 15-minute exposure. So again, you see some nice detail. There's sort of some blue color from a reflection, the reflection nebula part of the Orion Nebula there. And this is a very close-up view taken by a NASA image that shows the trapezium. So right at the heart of the nebula, you can see those stars that are making the rest of the surrounding gas glow there quite a bit. Before I move on to the next slide, just to note that we have a comment in the chat from the San Jose Astronomy Club, who said he thinks that he saw some auroral activity from our observing site last night. So that is very impressive. Again, it's a little bit tricky, again, because of our location. Again, usually you have to be further north. So that's very impressive if you've been able to see it. The only time I've ever seen the Northern Lights, I was in Alaska and was able to see them. And that was a wondrous sight. I hope to be able to see them again. But again, normally you have to travel quite a bit far to the north to see those Northern Lights, or the Southern Lights quite a bit further to the south.
You know, Toshi, it was really amazing. I actually saw the aurora from Tucson, Arizona, this is many years ago.
Yeah.
But it was just a sort of a red glow, and I thought it was over some mountain ranges, Tucson mountains, I think, and it just looked sort of reddish. But we saw next day in the newspaper that that indeed it was seen as far south as Tucson that night.
Yeah, that red glow is common for when you're looking at the aurora. If you happen to see the aurora from further south, as you go further north and you see better and better aurora, that's when you tend to get like the really pretty greens and blues and purples and all sorts of other colors. Usually, again, you have to be sort of right underneath the main part of the auroral oval that I was talking about there. Let's go ahead and switch back to the slides and take another look. This was another object that we thought about maybe taking a look at, something called the Owl Nebula. This was a 23-minute exposure, as you can see on the sort of nice information stamp there.
Toshi, could I interrupt you for just a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Because I actually got M37.
Oh, okay. Well,
Let
let's
me
go ahead and
can I share my
so let's go ahead and switch to your view.
Okay.
So nice that we'll get a pocket of clear sky. That's again the other nice thing about the EVScope is that we don't have to have a perfectly clear sky because of the stacking that the telescope is doing. If there's even some thin haze, what we're doing is the telescope is trying to build up detail, and it has, again, software on board that sort of takes images that aren't so good and sort of throws them out, and they don't get added to the stacking. So if there's a cloudy sort of image, as long as there aren't too many of those, it'll throw those images out. So we'll get a nice enhanced view.
So all of a sudden it's gotten clearer over there. Let's see, what about the other direction? Because the Owl Nebula, which is the next one we were going to show, Toshi, is over near the Big Dipper. And unfortunately, that looks kind of soft up.
But this one, Mike, why don't you go ahead and clear out the menu options there so we can get a better view of the cluster there. This one I know is sometimes called a salt and pepper cluster. And that's in a constellation called Auriga, the charioteer. And sometimes it's called the star lay in Polynesian traditions. So instead of a lei made out of flowers, it's a lei made out of stars. That's the constellation. And this is something that looks, even if you've got some decent binoculars, this is a good object because it tends to be kind of bright, but we get a nice view through the EVScope as well. And we see lots of stars, probably a few hundred stars in this cluster. Yeah, Mike, what do you think?
I'd have to check that again, Percy. I actually remember checking it a couple of days ago, and I don't remember what it said.
Yeah, usually with open clusters, you have a few hundred stars, as opposed to, there's another type of cluster called the globular cluster that's sort of shaped in a globe shape. That's why it's called a globular cluster. And those tend to have hundreds of thousands, but open cluster has hundreds of stars, and they tend to be younger stars.
Toshi, maybe what we can do is go directly to the globular cluster, the one that we were going to look at, because that seems to be in a pretty good spot with respect to the haze factor.
Okay.
Can you remind me what that's a Messier object? Can you remind me which one that is?
Actually, I think, did you want M3 or did you want the NGC, the Intergalactic Wanderer?
M3 is right in the direction of the streetlight, so I can't look at that one.
All right,
so I guess it's an NGC number.
The Intergalactic Wanderer, which was NGC, which stands for New General Catalog.
Okay.
for our viewers at 2419.
Okay.
And while you're looking that up, another question coming through the chat, the image through the EVScope looked a bit blurry. Is it because it's out of focus? Optical limit or would sharpness improve as you superimpose more and more images? So yeah, so the image that we're seeing through sort of the enhanced view does tend to look a little bit blurry just sort of on view, but if we look at the saved images, those tend to look a little bit better. And as you look for longer and longer times, then the image quality does tend to improve because you're just gathering more and more data. So again, if you take a look at some of the images that I'll have in the slides, they'll tend to look a little bit sharper, and that's because the software is sort of consciously taken like this is the image that I wanted to save. But there is some focus that can always be adjusted a little bit here and there, but usually when you save the image through the app, usually that tends to be a little bit sharper once you look at the final image that you get. But the view, as you're looking at sort of the view in the app, and by the way, I should say that Mike is controlling this through his phone. So if you get an EVScope, there's an app that you get to control the scope. So the scope itself doesn't have any onboard controls. You do it all through an app, either on your phone or you can use a tablet as well. I think Mike, yeah, scroll down a little bit more.
Okay, as I'm trying to remember exactly what it looks like before the enhanced viewing. But let me go ahead and see if I can do the enhanced view and see if we can get it. I apologize for the fact that we can't show M3. M3 is a much better specimen, nice and bright. And maybe we can start talking a little bit about globular clusters while I see if I can start the enhanced view here.
Yeah, so again, the globular clusters, they tend to be collections of older stars. And they are some of the oldest objects in the universe. So the one that we're looking at here is, actually, I don't have an age listed here, but they do tend to be quite far away. This one is about 300,000 light years away from us, so quite distant. And this one's in the constellation of Lynx.
It's about 300,000. I'm sorry, Toshi, I'm trying to pay attention to too many things at once here. The intergalactic wanderer is one that they thought might be not associated with a galaxy, but now it's believed that it actually orbits in a very large orbit the Milky Way. And it's extremely far away. It's something like 300,000 light years away.
Yeah,
which is quite extreme.
And just checking my notes, it looks like they think it orbits with a period of about 3 billion years. So that's billion with a B. So quite a long time to orbit around there.
So I'm watching the stacking here, Toshi, and it doesn't look to me like I actually see.
I think I see it near the top of the field of view there.
Oh, I think you're right.
So there's sort of just above center there. Yeah, there's like a double star that's there, and then there's a bright star above that, and then above that is a fuzzy thing. And that fuzzy thing, as we let the telescope go through its enhancement process, that'll start hopefully to get sharper and sharper. Again, part of that is the sort of the clouds and the haze that we're dealing with at the moment. Part of it has to do with whatever light pollution happens to be around. But again, that's the nice thing about the EVScope, is that ordinarily to see something like this, and I'm already starting to see a lot more detail. We're coming up on 2 minutes looking at this, but we can see more detail in that little cluster. Well, what looks like a little cluster, it's actually quite a large cluster in actual size. But in the field of view that we have here, it does appear kind of small. But as you look at that fuzzy thing as time continues on here, we'll see a little bit more detail there.
So one of the things I wanted to share is the excitement that I get, that I know others have. I've spoken with others who get the same impression, that it is very exciting to be harvesting these ancient photons. I mean, if this is in fact 300,000 light years away, that means that the light has been traveling for 300,000 years. And it also means that the fact that we can see it this big at that extreme distance means that it must be fairly large as well. And to me, it kind of makes me feel small and big, sort of all at the same time. It really amazes me when I think of this idea that everything that we're seeing as we look out into space is delayed by a certain amount of time because of the light travel time. Do you get that sort of sense, Toshi?
Yeah, and it's been said that looking out into space, especially the further out into space that you look, is like having a time machine because of all the time that it takes for light to get to us. So sometimes we're looking at an object and it's been, that light has been traveling so long that if you take a moment to think about it, everything in space is also moving, which means that the object that you're looking at, it's not where we see it is not where it actually is. It's sort of moved somewhere else probably, but again, it's taken all that time for the light to get to us. So it's no longer there, and it doesn't even look like that anymore. That's how it looked hundreds of thousands of years ago, again, depending on the object that you're looking at here.
Toshi, I'd like to thank Joseph. He actually said that M79 and LIPUS should be an option. I appreciate that. I just checked it out, and it turns out from where we're positioned, my house with respect to LIPUS is now low and behind a hedge. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to try that one. It looks, and unfortunately, it also looks like it is, it's got the haze factor also. So I'm not sure that we would be able to, but like I say, it's actually blocked, so I can't try that. But thank you for the feedback and the suggestion.
So it looks like we're coming up on 4 minutes on this exposure. And Mac, maybe if you zoom out a little bit instead of in, I think zooming in just kind of makes it look a little blurrier.
Fuzzier.
So if you zoom out a bit there, again, it's a little bit tough to tell. I think it's just sort of the conditions that we're dealing with tonight, but that fuzzy patch there is starting to get more data that we're gathering there, but those that fuzzy bits there, it's actually again made up of individual stars, probably a few 100,000 stars. One of the largest globular clusters has nearly 1 million stars. This one isn't as large as that one, but again, we're talking about several 100,000 stars, probably, or at least on the order of hundreds of thousands of stars that are all fairly densely packed together. In fact, it's often said that if we lived on a planet that was inside the middle of a globular cluster, that we would never have a dark night because there would be so many stars surrounding us that there would be starlight all the time and the sky would look bright and we wouldn't have a dark sky to be looking at if you were trying to observe the universe from the center of a globular cluster.
What I started to say before, Toshi, about not finding, I found a globular cluster which is pretty faint as they go. And part of the problem is this time of year, it is difficult because of the way that globular clusters are positioned around the galaxy. It's difficult to find them this time of year. I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, one other difference between globular clusters and the open clusters that we saw earlier is that the open clusters, recall that our galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy, is a spiral galaxy, and it tends to be fairly flat, like a pancake. And the open clusters, they tend to be within the spiral arms of our galaxy. But the globulars, like the one we're looking at here, they tend to sort of surround the galaxy in all directions. So we typically are able to see them when we're looking out of the plane of our galaxy. And that's, again, kind of what we're looking at here. This view, sort of, if I tell you, you might be able to believe me if and convince yourself that, again, that fuzzy patch there, starting to see a little more detail. But again, you can maybe imagine that it's made of individual stars there instead of being just one sort of continuous fuzzy thing, but that it's a fuzzy thing made of individual dots, sort of like what's that artistic style, pointillism, where you make a picture out of lots of dots. Well, that's what this globular cluster is. It's made of lots of individual dots to have, again, hundreds of thousands of stars in that cluster there.
So Toshi, I checked the sky again. Um, I'm thinking it's pretty iffy to be able to get M81, which was the first galaxy that we're going to try and get. It looks to me like Leo is a little less covered by the haze. So either 2903, I think, was the one that was, and then we also had the Leo triplet over in Leo. So one of the ones over in Leo is probably the best one for us to try here, given the
Sounds
way
good.
the view's deteriorating here.
Yeah, maybe let's do 2903. That's NGC 2903. And let's see if we can get that one first, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay. See if I can reuse the NGC part here.
So again, 2903.
2903.
And I always like to say, never let an astronomer name anything because we're terrible at it. So a lot of things like this, we just give numbers in a catalog. Or sometimes when we talk about, that big storm that's on Jupiter, it's big and it's red, and we call it the Great Red Spot. Even the nebula in Orion that we're talking about, it doesn't get a cool fancy name. We just call it the Great Nebula in Orion. So astronomers are absolutely terrible at naming things. We come up with either the most boring names or just a number in a catalog or something that's just kind of, it's a very obvious name to it. Occasionally we come up with some cool names, but for the most part, they're not the most thrilling names that are available.
The scope's sort of slewing around here, given the way the telescope is built. The area that we were in and the area that we're going to is sort of a large trek here. So it's getting closer.
Makes it look like we're going through, warp speed, heading
I
warp 5 over to NGC 2903.
still see Regulus and Leo there. And I see the Nebula, which is the tail star. So it's not completely obscured. So we'll see what our luck turns out to be here. Still says it's slewing. Oh, there's some good star images there. Let's see what they. It says go to validated. So let's go ahead and start stacking and see what we get. Because I don't think, some of the things, if they're bright enough and they've got stars in them, you can recognize the field. This particular object, though, I don't know exactly. I mean, it is fairly faint. So it takes some stacking before you can actually see the field well enough. So
yeah, it's definitely one of the things that I found when I was going through some tests with the EVScope is, especially when you're looking at for a faint object, sometimes you need to do just a little bit of stacking to see if you can see where the object is, and then you can sort of recenter the image and start stacking again to get a better, more centralized image. But sometimes you have to these objects are so faint. Again, nothing you would see with a naked eye or even just sort of casually looking through a telescope. If anybody or any of our viewers have their own telescope and you've set it up and you look at things, especially you're looking at faint things, a lot of times they don't look like what you see in the big Hubble images. Sometimes people get discouraged by that. Like something with the Orion Nebula, you wouldn't see any of the color that we started to see there. The Horsehead Nebula that I showed in the slide with that red color, you would never see that with a backyard telescope just looking through the eyepiece. So it's nice to have the EVScope here where you can see a lot of faint things that, again, just with a backyard telescope would be pretty near impossible to see without doing the stacking and processing. And again, traditionally, you would be doing that and then you would be having to run it through a completely separate program. And so you have to wait until you do that stacking process and figure out which images are good and which images are bad to be able to see anything. But to be able to see it all together immediately is impressive.
Okay, Toshi, I think we're getting it.
Yep.
It's just, so there are two stars sort of in the middle of the field. Let me turn off the rest of it. It's in the upper part of the field, about halfway between the left and right edges.
Yeah, I can see it. Kind of looks like a diagonal line with a bright spot, or maybe it looks like a star that looks a little fuzzy diagonal line there. Now that you've zoomed in on it, we're starting to see just a little bit of structure to it. This is a spiral galaxy that we're looking at, specifically what astronomers would call a barred spiral, which means that there is what looks like a bar running through the center. So it's not just a center dot or central bright bit of brightness there. That brightness is sort of elongated, and we can actually start to see that here. And then surrounding that, some spiral arms looking like a whirlpool there. And again, we're starting to see a little bit of that structure here as well.
Toshi, did you say exactly, because I believe this, I mean, the galaxies, as you start looking at galaxies, those are things that are really far out. And I think this might have been like 10 million light years, something like that.
My notes say 30 million.
Oh, 30. So okay. Yeah, that's right. I forgot.
Quite distant. Yeah, the closest major galaxy to us is the Andromeda galaxy. That's 2.5 million light years away. And so this one is 30 million light years away. So quite a bit distant, which means, again, talking about light years, it means that the light that we're seeing right now appearing on our screens left this galaxy 30 million years ago. So
wow,
that was a long time ago. I don't know what you were doing 30 million years ago, but that was a long time ago.
It's hard to remember that far back.
Yes.
Well, Toshi,
after the dinosaurs had been extinguished, but sort of halfway going back in time to the time of the dinosaurs, the last dinosaurs.
Did you say in your comments there, Toshi, that this was a barred spiral?
That's what my notes tell me. Yeah, a barred spiral.
I think I can see that. It's kind of interesting to watch these things as they sort of appear slowly. And apparently, I mean, this looks pretty good. I'm going to go back over to you, Toshi. I'm going to go take a look at Leo again, because it looks like this looks better than what I expected.
Yeah, and again, as the telescope is gathering more light and stacking these images, hopefully you can start to see that, again, some of that spiral structure. So again, it looks like a line coming down from that center nucleus there. Again, that center nucleus already looks a little bit elongated is what I'm seeing, and sort of some spiral arms sort of up and to the left, and then kind of spiraling towards the right, and then sort of on the opposite end of going sort of down and to the right. That spiral, I can convince myself that it's sort of down and to the right, and then spiraling more to the left there. So starting to make out some of that spiral structure. In fact, a couple of arms that look like they're becoming apparent on either side, so in the upper left and in the lower right of the galaxy there.
Toshi, we might want to try, I mean, it isn't consistently getting worse, it just changes. some parts will be clearer and some parts will be, less clear. And right now I'm looking over at the bowl of the Big Dipper, which I believe is close to where M81 is. We might be able to try M81. What's nice about M81 is it's closer to us, to where we are, and so actually is bigger on the screen, and you're able to see even more detail. Although I love the detail that we're getting on this one, Toshi.
Yeah, in fact, Mike, how long of an exposure is this that we're looking at so far?
Oh, good question. Oh, and we're running out of time too.
So yeah, so it looks like this is about 4 minutes worth here. So, but yeah, if you think M81 looks like it's in the clear, then maybe that could be our last target for the evening here.
Okay, let's go ahead and try that.
But I know that's a very, very popular one for amateurs to take a look at that one. Again, it's in the Big Dipper, so it's generally pretty easy to find. Relatively bright to start off with, but again, another spiral galaxy that we can see sort of from the not quite edge on, but not quite face down. It's sort of at a little bit of an angle from our viewpoint here on Earth. And that's a nice, it's got a nice bright center. And then again, those spiral arms going out. This one is not barred, so it has more sort of a central round glow in the center, as opposed to sort of the elongated bar that we saw with the previous galaxy. It's also known as Bode's galaxy. But we're going ahead and
this one is has been studied extensively because it is so close, and it's so it's a great target.
Yeah, it's about 12 million light years away, so about half the distance, a little bit less than half the distance to the galaxy that we were just looking at.
Was
so
this
significantly closer?
Was this a William Herschel discovery, Toshi? I can't remember.
I don't remember off the top of my head. The one we were just looking at, I know, was discovered by William Herschel way back in 1784.
Oh, okay. I think that's the one I was thinking about then. Moving to, I don't see anything yet that looks like it. Of course, it's not completely done yet, so it may be trying to confirm that it's still pointing where it thinks it's pointing. So it's okay. I can see both the handle and the bowl of the Big Dipper there. So
I think it's got it, or very close now.
Is there something
in the middle
that
looks a little fuzzy near the center?
Okay, let me go ahead and. Oh, it still says slewing.
It's still. Oh, it looks like
it put it more in the center. So let's see if I can go ahead and do the enhanced viewing on that one.
But again, this is something to be able to look at galaxies is a real treat. This is something that before in our previous star parties, when we were looking at the moon, that was easy to look at with Mike's telescope because it was nice and bright.
So bright.
Again, galaxies that we're looking at here, extremely faint. And if we were to try to do this with the same setup that we had before when we were looking at the moon, just would not be possible at all. The view that you're getting, even with the unenhanced view before we started enhancing the view, even that I think is probably better than what we would see just looking through Mike's personal telescope that we've been using for previous star parties. So to be able to see galaxies like this, again, a real treat. Already at just 30 seconds here, almost 40 seconds of exposure, you can see again that bright sort of distinct circular center nucleus on the galaxy, and then surrounded by fuzziness, all that fuzziness that we see there are the spiral arms that, again, depending on how long we take a look at this exposure, we see more and more detail
And
building
maybe,
up.
Toshi, you've already mentioned it. And I apologize if I missed it, but in the nucleus is where astronomers now believe every galaxy has got a supergiant black hole.
Yeah, just about every galaxy, although there have been a couple of exceptions, but just about every galaxy seems to have a supermassive black hole at its center. And that's part of what creates this glow. That's where the highest concentration of stars are as they sort of surround this supermassive black hole at the center, and they become sort of the core of these galaxies, with other stars forming in those spiral arms and other open clusters like we saw earlier. They form again in those spiral arms. The globulars, they sort of surround in a more sort of spherical distribution around the nucleus. That's where you find the globulars, but those open clusters, again, right within the spiral arms, so right in the fuzzy bits there.
Toshi, and because of the fact that we're running out of time here, I was going to see if I could find in the gallery if we have a M81, and it doesn't look like it. I suppose what you could do is you could go ahead and put the slides back on and show the M81 slide.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and do that real quick, and we'll sort of finish off with that here. So let me go ahead and focus in on myself here, and we'll take a look again at the slide. So this is an image that we took on a sort of a much clearer night, 16-minute exposure for M81 here. Again, you got that bright center, and start to see some of these spiral arms here. This again is a nice professional image from the Hubble. And so again, this is the kind of sort of detail that you can get. Again, there was a question earlier about the image looking a little bit out of focus. What we're looking for in focus images, we're looking at the stars, looking to see that they look nice and sharp, and then sort of the fuzziness, you get that with more and more detail there.
Well, Toshi,
I'm just gonna
remember
sort of
that we have this layer of haze, which could be fuzzing things up to some degree as well.
Yeah, that's also complicating things. This is a view of the Bard spiral that we're looking at just before that last galaxy there. Again, in this one, you can see again sort of a distinct elongation there to the nucleus, and then the spiral arms. And we get a similar view from this Hubble view here. Again, I trust that if this is sort of just focusing in on the view that we have in the wide field of view of the image here. And just because we are running a bit short on time, do want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. We didn't get a chance to take a look at all the objects, but I do want to mention that public planetarium shows are back starting next week. We're doing a run through the middle of May, again, starting next week, and you can check out the schedule and see purchase your tickets on our website. So I hope everybody goes ahead and checks that out. And let's see, Mike, any last words? Sorry to sort of cut things off here, but Mike, did you have any last words for everybody?
Yeah, I'd like to just look in the chat here. Tillman asked a question. He said, if light travels that long and you take a 1 minute, a 5 minute exposure shot, do we see only photons starting their journey within the 5 minute time window? Yes, except if it was 10 million light years away, it was 10 million years ago that those 5 minutes of photons left the object.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just wanted to answer the question. Thanks so much for coming to see the. I'm so sorry that we had some trouble with the weather here. Fortunately, we still haven't figured out how to control the weather. We can control lots of other things, but not the weather too much at this point. So I hope to see some of you at the. A week from today is when we start doing public shows again at the planetarium. So if you're in the Bay Area or close to Cupertino and can come, it would be great to see you in person. Thanks, Toshi.
All right, and thank you, Mike. And once again, thank all of you for joining and staying a little bit over time here. So we appreciate your kind attention. Hopefully you enjoy the program. We're hoping to do more programs with the EVScope so that you can check that out and see some of the other objects. We're again very excited to have this scope so that we can see more and more deep sky objects, things that again are very tricky to see with a traditional telescope. So we're very happy to have this telescope and to be able to take our images and see what other things that we can see with it, and to be able to share that with all of you. So once again, on behalf of the entire planetarium staff, thank you very much for tuning in, and come see us in person for the first time in over 2 years. We're very excited about that as well. So do come check us out, and keep an eye on all of our social media and on our website for more events coming your way soon. So thanks very much. Have a good night, everybody, and keep looking up at the sky, looking for all those different objects. Look for the ISS going across the sky, all sorts of things to see in the night sky, and we're happy to share those with all of you. So thanks very much. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.